Hello, hello, everybody. We're just letting everybody in from the waiting room. So just be patient for a second, and we're just going to get started in just a minute. Hello, everybody. We're just letting everybody in from the waiting room. We're going to start in just 2 minutes. I'm going to just go over some housekeeping before we get started, which is you can ask questions in the chat. There will be someone monitoring the chat so that we can recap them at the end after we go through the presentation. We'll be sharing relevant links for you during the presentation, so look out for those at different points of the presentation that relate to the point we're discussing. You'll be emailed a recording of the presentation afterwards, and it'll also be on YouTube. And you can contact any of us to answer any questions if you want. Don't want to ask them publicly here, but you can ask them privately in a conversation with any of us. There is the chat button at the bottom to leave your chat messages. You can, but we're going to go through the presentation and hold for questions at the end. A couple other announcements that I thought would be fun to talk about. We do a women's business blog, part of our website, and that if you know any Brooklyn-based women-owned businesses that you think would be great for us to feature, please just send them our way. We love interviewing people, and we have amazing SEO, so it's always a real boost for the business that we feature. If you want, you can share this class with friends. Like I said, the YouTube will be, video will be up on YouTube, and we'll also email you a link of it. And then after this class, we'll also be sending you our Buying into Brooklyn handbook that we offer people. It's a really dense book with a lot of information that overviews the process here in New York City about buying property. So just going to wait 1 or 2 more minutes to see if we get everybody into the room. And then we'll get started. And I got a message from our lawyer, Rashidah, saying she's stuck in a closing, unfortunately, and she might be joining us a little bit late or not at all, depending on how the rest of the closing goes. But I'm going to say that she'll be here if she can be, and but she will be available if you guys need to speak with her after this. Hi, everybody. We're going to be starting shortly. We're just waiting 1 or 2 more minutes to get everybody in. Looks like some people are still joining. We went over a couple of housekeeping things. There's a chat at the bottom, so you can ask any questions there. If you don't want to ask any questions publicly, you can speak to any of us after this privately. What else? We'll be sharing relevant links for you throughout the presentation. So keep your eye on the chat for links to resources, but all those resources will be available after the class as well. Okay, I'm going to say that it is 5:04. We should maybe get started. Okay, we're going to get started. Hi, my name is Victoria Alexander, and I'm the owner of Realty Collective, a boutique real estate firm that I started 16 years ago. That my goals were to defy the stereotypes associated with real estate brokers in New York City. And my job is basically to coach you, your therapist, and all your own sounding board, helping you through the emotional roller coaster that is buying New York City real estate. So welcome, everybody. And I'm going to introduce Rashidah. Oh, Rashidah's not here. I already had said that. Rashidah is not going to be able to join us maybe at all, or maybe joining late because she's stuck in a closing, because closings now take a lot longer than normal because of just the interesting moments we're in with COVID, and we can talk about that in this class. But I'm going to introduce Lisa Yanchi, who I work with from Cross Country Mortgage, who really specializes in working with first-time home buyers. And Lisa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. Really happy to be here. Thanks so much for joining. I have been in the mortgage industry for about 7 or 8 years now. I specialize in New York, but I do mortgages all over the East Coast, the West Coast, you name it. I definitely love working with first-time home buyers. So I'm really excited to sort of give you guys a little 101 on the process and answer any questions you have.
Thank you for that, Lisa. I'm just changing my, there we go, my presentation mode so that I can see what I'm doing. So we're going to get started. I know that Rashidah's not here to present her information on the lawyer side, but we're going to fill in for her best that we can. So there's the three people you need for buying in New York City right now, and that is a lawyer, a mortgage professional, and a real estate broker. I want everybody to understand, when you message somebody on Zillow, when you go to an open house, that broker is representing the seller. They represent the best interests of their seller, and they have a fiduciary responsibility to the seller. That will always come over your desires, needs, wants, goals. They're working for the seller, not for you. So I want you to remember that. And then, so then you're going to make sure that these are jobs that you interview for. So make sure that you interview your real estate broker, which is me, Lisa, your mortgage professional, or your lawyer. Make sure you're comfortable with these people, that you understand that they have clear communication style, and that you feel like they are interested in helping you, and that you're not a problem to be solved, as Tina says. And that personality type and guiding you through the process is their main goal. So like I said earlier, I'm your therapist, your sounding board, and your general coach throughout this whole process. And the other thing to bring out, that when we're talking about the roles of people play, that real estate broker for buyers does not cost them anything. You're not paying for my services. The seller pays for my services, and they're part of the closing costs that sellers account for when they are selling their property. You have about the same amount of closing costs. You have about 8% when you're selling, and 4 to 6% of closing costs when you're buying. Right, Lisa? I know that like co-ops and condos sometimes in our interchange are different because of the fees associated with the two types of property, but I would say that's a general rule of thumb.
Yeah, that's a general rule. For co-op, it's much lower, but for condo and single family, for sure, depending on the purchase price.
So why buy now is where we always start. Rent's too damn high. The rent has come down, right? And we're all excited about that. But then you get to have make your own space, have your own design, long-term investment, you're building equity. These are some of the reasons that you might buy right now. And right now, the cost of buying and renting has never been closer. So it's something just think about. If you're spending $3,000 a month on rent, you probably could be spending $3,000 a month towards a mortgage, and be seeing that money grow and build equity for you over time. Where rent, you never see a return on that investment. That's just, you're paying somebody else's mortgage when you're paying rent. I think next slide. And to help you all figure this out, we have something called the rent versus buy matrix. There's going to be a link in the chat about that. It's provided by the New York Times. You put in your specific circumstances, and it'll tell you if buying right now is for you. Next slide. So now that you've decided that you are interested in buying, you're going to assemble your team. The first person you're going to call, and that I suggest you call, is Lisa. You're going to call your mortgage professional to figure out what your purchasing power is, what your buying power is, what the bank is going to loan to you. The other people on your team is your attorney, your real estate broker, and you might need a contractor, architect, inspector, and you're definitely going to need lead time. If your lease is up in 30 days and you have to move, you might have to find some other circumstances that is going to get you through this process, because it is not going to be a quick, you're not going to be able to find something tomorrow and close in 30 days in New York City. It just does not happen unless you're an all cash buyer. And I'm sure that those are few and far between to be in that situation. Lisa, do you want to talk about your role as the team member?
Sure. So Victoria's absolutely right. One of the first people you should talk to is a mortgage professional. The reason why is because you want to make sure that you are looking at things that you can afford, and you're looking at things you can get pre-approved for. There's no point in looking at a purchase price that the mortgage is going to be over what you can be pre-approved for. Similarly, there's no point in sort of cutting yourself off from some properties that you might really love because you don't think you can afford them. That's sort of my job. The very first thing we do when we have a conversation is I talk to you and talk about what you're looking for. What is sort of a ballpark idea of a purchase price you're interested in? What kind of property are you looking for? How long do you think you're going to stay there? Where's the down payment coming from? These are really important questions to help figure out the best product for you. Once I have that information, then you fill out an application, we get some documents, I crunch the numbers, and then what I give you is called a pre-approval letter, or someone mentioned in the chat, a pre-qual letter. And that basically is a letter that lets you know that I've done my due diligence, I've run your credit, I've looked at the situation, and this is what you can get pre-approved for. That is really a working draft. Okay, with that letter, you'll start going out with Victoria, you'll start looking at properties. And let's say when you started looking, you were really thinking of a co-op around 400,000. But then you start looking at things and you're like, gosh, I really like this condo that is 550. That's okay. You come back to me and you say, hey, Lisa, here's the listing. I really like this place. Like, could it work? And we crunch the numbers, and I'll just sort of continually get you an updated pre-approval until you find the right place. In terms of financing, there's a whole bunch of different programs. And what I love about what we offer is I have a slew of programs, so I can really find the right one for you rather than fitting you into like that one 30-year product that I have. Traditionally, you put 20% down. That doesn't mean you have to. You can do something called FHA. That's typically for single family homes or multifamily homes, where you can put as little as 3.5% down. You can put 5% down. You can put 10% down. So it really depends on what you're looking for and what your needs are. The other thing is credit. Everyone always asks me, they're very concerned about having their credit run because they think it's going to affect their score. The fact is, mortgage is a protected category. So because we need to run your credit to see your credit score, which helps determines your rate, as well as to see your liabilities, your debt, which helps see what we can pre-approve you for. When I run credit, I always get my client's permission first. I run it once and it's good for 4 months. I won't run it again without your permission. And again, because mortgage is sort of a protected category, as long as you don't have a bunch of different mortgage companies all running your credit at the same time, it's really not going to affect your score. And it's an important ingredient in getting you pre-approved.
Great. Is there anything to think about that's COVID related to applying for financing, Lisa, that we should consider?
Yeah, well, so right now things are starting to calm down a bit. So we don't have a lot of the situations we had, a year ago. The most important COVID thing is really for self-employed borrowers, because a lot of self-employed businesses, unfortunately, were closed during, the peak of COVID. So if you're self-employed, that does not mean you can't get pre-approved. You absolutely can. I work with self-employed borrowers all the time. But you need to have a conversation about not only how much you made in terms of what's on your tax returns, but how your business is doing now. And again, that's sort of a conversation you can have with a financial professional. Other than that, appraisals are back up and running, programs are up and running, we're hopefully over the big hurdle of last year in terms of a few issues.
That is very welcoming to hear and positive. Thanks. Next slide, please, Meredith. So where do you search? I'm sure most people are looking on Zillow and Trulia and Realtor.com. And the internet has changed how people search. You now have made things more transparent. All brokers who are members of REBNY have access to all the same listings and work together. So really gone are the days where somebody has something that is not on the internet that you wouldn't have access to. So I think that's just something that people are always worried about when working with a buyer's broker, is that, oh my God, well then other brokers aren't going to want to engage with us because they're going to, want to represent the deal the whole time and have these what used to be called pocket listings. Those have really, dried up from the market. Then if you're using a public site, we always say to use StreetEasy because it was always really designed to be consumer based and consumer facing instead of for real estate brokers. So they just have the most up-to-date listings and for especially for Brooklyn, really have the most amount of relevant information. Zillow and Trulia, and especially like realtor.com, they don't do a good job of actually updating the listings as far as like I'm concerned. We aggregate all of these results for you on an internal MLS that the public just does not have access to, called the RLS, which is the revenue-based multiple listing service. I was trying to remember what the MLS stands for. So the revenue multiple listing service is called the RLS, and we can set you up in get the back end of the listing sent to you. That's different than StreetEasy. And then we aggregate all this, the search criteria, and we send you some COVID forms, because nowadays you need to have COVID forms for every showing of an apartment that you go to, and we will fill that out for you and send them in for each appointment. What else? Keep in mind that the seller's agent representative. Yep. So what are you looking for? I think go to the next slide, please. Finding your dream home. I know that a lot of people always are focused on a neighborhood, like I want to be in Williamsburg. If you want a doorman, you probably are not going to be able to find that in Williamsburg. Understanding if you want to buy a co-op, you probably are not going to also be looking in Williamsburg. It'll probably be Brooklyn Heights, Prospect Heights, maybe some Park Slope, but realize the building typology really will dictate the neighborhoods that you're interested in. So if you are like, I have to be off the F line, and I only want to buy a co-op, you're going to be really limited to neighborhoods that have, co-op buildings, which is probably not Cobble Hill, Carroll Gardens, which is off the F line. So just keeping in mind that you need to align your search criteria with the building typologies that is offered. If you're looking for new construction, you probably are going to look in Williamsburg or in Gowanus. There's lots of neighborhoods that have new construction happening in them. Bed-Stuy, there's a ton, and that there's a lot of opportunity there to get in at really still great prices. And especially with interest rates being so low, it makes it really affordable. Like I said earlier, the buying power between it's never been closer between renting and buying right now. Those numbers there's just a fairly small gap in what your monthly expenses could be based on what the rent prices are. Okay, so I think that then the other thing is when people are searching, I ask them to make their 5 deal breakers and go over what their real, needs are based on long-term. You're going to be staying in this place for probably about at least 5 years for you guys to reach that break-even horizon. So you don't want to be buying something that you can't have room to grow in, or at least see yourself living in for 5 years. Next slide. So now that you've found your dream home and it's time to put in an offer, where do you start? Well, first we have to start by submitting your offer with a revenue submit offer form, which outlines your financial criteria, your pre-approval that you would get from Lisa, and a cover letter. I think that especially when you're buying a resale or not from a developer, that letter really goes a long way. And those are 3 things I'll prep you on before we start even looking at property seriously. Then you want to make your offer contingent on a couple of things. You want to make your offer contingent on financing, because if the bank can't give you a loan, you don't want to buy the property, I'm assuming. And if you don't have a financing contingency, you can lose your deposit. The other contingency I always recommend is a inspection. So if you're buying a property like a condo or a house, you definitely want an inspector. Co-ops, it depends on how some people feel about it, but I always suggest having a contingency on for inspection so that you get to really understand what you're buying into and understand the mechanicals and how the building works. Any other things I'm missing, Lisa?
The mortgage contingency is really important. The mortgage contingency, basically what that does is, if for some reason you can't get a mortgage, it enables you to get your down payment back. So it's a protection for you. Another important thing is the closing date that is negotiated in the contract. That the typical language in New York is on or about, traditionally it's on or about 60 days. So that gives both you a 30-day window legally. If you need more than 60 days for whatever reason, it also gives the seller a 30-day window. So, so those are sort of some of the terms as you are, as you're creating an accepted offer. And actually just one thing to mention is, like, throughout the process, when you get to the point where you have an accepted offer, you're constantly talking with Victoria, with myself, and with Rashidah or your attorney, because we're all sort of working together so that everyone's on the same page for when you have fully executed contracts, so that like we can move forward. Do you want me to talk a little bit about what Rashidah does in terms of due diligence with the contract, Victoria?
Sure, that would be super helpful. Thanks.
So, okay, so let's say Victoria's done her job. She's gotten you an accepted offer. You guys are on board with the terms. And then your attorney, or Rashidah, is basically working with the seller's attorney to negotiate the contract. So that's when things like the deadline for the mortgage contingency, it's typically 45 days. That's outlined in the contract. Another thing is the closing date. That's outlined in the contract. And your attorney is working for you to make sure that you're protected. And the seller's attorney is working for the seller, and they do their attorney thing and come up with a compromise on a lot of terms. One of the really, really important things that your attorney is going to do if you buy a condo or co-op is do the due diligence to look at the condo and co-op documents. It's very, very important if you are buying a co-op or condo, particularly a co-op, that you work with an attorney who knows how to do condos and co-ops, because there's a big part of your attorney's job is to review board minutes, is to make sure there's no red flags in terms of what you're buying into, that there's no litigation going on with the condo or co-op. These are all really, really important things. They're also, by the way, really, really important with financing. So, so as you are doing your search and finding the property, just like you need to make sure that you're working with an attorney that knows how to do condos and co-ops, if that's the route you're going, you also need to make sure you're working with a financial person who knows how to do condos and co-ops, because that they will work with you and work with your attorney to make sure that some of these red flags aren't there by the time you get into contract. So then you have an accepted offer, you have fully executed contracts, you sign, the seller signs, now it's a live deal. What that means is that you have totally kept me in the loop. We have been talking throughout the process so that as soon as we have fully executed contracts, you or your attorney send them to me and we start the mortgage process. By that, I mean, it becomes an official application, which means that the appraisal is ordered, which means that if it's a condo or co-op, the condo and co-op docs are ordered from the management company. And my team, who are amazing, do their job to basically get you through underwriting. Underwriting is basically the underwriter works for the bank, and the underwriter's job is to make sure that the people applying for the loan fit all the criteria of that loan. When the underwriter reviews your file, you get what's called a mortgage commitment or an approval, which basically means the underwriters look through everything and given their stamp of approval and says, this is awesome. And that's really important, because that basically, if you're going for a co-op board will not schedule your board interview until they have an approval from the underwriter. So it's really important when you work with a financial person that you ask about their turn times with underwriting, because the longer it's going to take you to get through underwriting, the longer you're going to have to wait to get to the next step of the process, which is the clear to close. We personally are like uber fast, which is one of the reasons I'm really proud of my team, but every bank is a little different. So you need to, as you're interviewing people and having a conversation, you need to talk to them about turn times. So you go through all that, you're approved. Then the second part of the process, if it's a condo or co-op, is that condo or co-op is approved and your financial person is working on sort of both of those things simultaneously. We get the approval for both of them. And then we have what's called the clear to close, which is very exciting because I send an email out to Victoria and Rashidah and say, we have the clear to close, let's do this. And then Rashidah reaches out to the seller's attorney, if it's the co-op, if it's a co-op, to the co-op attorney as well. And this closing is scheduled. Lots of times now with COVID, it's done virtually. And pre-COVID, it was all done at a big table and everyone sort of sat around and signed things together. Now it's done a little more remotely, and hopefully it might stay that way because I think it's very efficient. And you sign all of the disclosures that you've actually seen multiple times e-signed through the mortgage process, but now it's sort of the final phase. Your attorney's job is to explain everything you're signing so that you clearly understand everything that you're signing, and then you get the keys. And actually, before that, I'm sorry, I jumped the gun. Victoria, do you want to talk about final inspection?
Yep. So we do a final walkthrough 48 hours before the closing to make sure that the property is being delivered specifically how we requested it. So if you're buying new construction, we create a punch list ahead of time, usually a couple weeks out, to go over the small things that a developer would do that doesn't really happen in a resale. If there's a paint scuff, make sure all the appliances work. They're going to do the fine tuning of making the apartment immaculate before you close. For resale, it's a little bit different. It's just to make sure that any repairs that came up in inspection have been addressed, that all the appliances work, that all the outlets work, but they're not going to spackle the holes for you. They're not going to repaint any walls for you. It's going to be barely broom swept, and you're just going to feel like you're going to go in there and do a little bit of polishing beforehand, but that you want to make sure that all of the things that have come up on the inspection, like if the HVAC wasn't working or if the stove wasn't working, they've all been addressed ahead of time. If they aren't addressed, then we have to put money in escrow, or the lawyers put money in escrow to make sure that that gets addressed after closing, and they were holding on to their money so that they are motivated to do it. Did we really talk about, and maybe you want to talk about, Lisa, like seller concessions or seller credits that we can negotiate as part of our financing deal to cover any of the expenses?
Sure. So particularly in new construction, and I have to say Rashidah's, we work on a lot of deals together, and she's really, really good at this. Negotiating credits from the sponsor or from the seller. So that basically means that that the attorneys have negotiated a credit that then you will use to help with your closing costs. So sometimes that the sponsor does it because it's new construction and they are motivated to sell their units. Sometimes something came up in inspection, and rather than fix it, the seller is like, okay, I'll just give you a credit to deal with that item. And all of that will be on what's called your closing disclosures. It'll be on your contract and then on your closing disclosures as well. And that's basically the page for both buyer and seller, and buyer and seller's attorney and title, and basically everybody, to see who's getting paid and how they're getting paid. And most of that is happening at closing.
Great. The other things to really think about are for all this process is thinking about the I'm going to go over my bullet points here for the end of the thing. That we have a bunch of resources that make this process really less stressful than it really is for most people. We manage all of our clients in a project management tool called Basecamp that has a flood of resources so that people feel really educated and armed with the information they need to make educated decisions for themselves. We do this back-end search that only the MLS can do. So even if you're on StreetEasy, you're not going to be getting all of the listings compiled in one place. And that's what we have called Realty MX. That's why I also encourage everybody to just schedule a call with your mortgage professional, Lisa, to talk about your buying power and what the banks are willing to loan to you. And then let's take the next steps from there. Like I said, the home buying handbook would be sent to you after this class as well. And I think that we're going to tie it all up after the closings happen. You know, you get the keys and now you're a Brooklyn homeowner or New York City homeowner. Lisa, did you talk about what areas you cover for financing? It's not just New York. You can do the whole country.
Yep. So a big chunk of my business is in Brooklyn and New York City, but I do deals in Westchester, Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, California. I just did a bunch of deals in Wisconsin. So I have programs for everywhere. So a fair amount of clients I'm working with right now are people who are actually looking to buy a second home, either upstate or someplace else. So that's something we can talk about as well. I do investment properties, pretty much anything residential, I can do it. So it's just a matter of figuring out, what that would look like and if that works for you. There was a question in the chat about foreclosures that I just wanted to touch on real quick. So yes, foreclosures are a little tricky because it depends on what kind of foreclosure it is. So if it's a foreclosure like a short sale from the bank, you can get a mortgage for that type of process. It is a very complicated process because basically you get everything ready and then you just wait for the bank that's selling the property to say when they're ready to close. So it is possible, but it's but it's not really for the faint-hearted because it is a little bit of a tricky process. If you're talking about a foreclosure in like an auction situation, the only way you're going to get a property like that is either paying all cash, which is what most people do, or getting what's called a short-term hard money loan, which I don't do those, but I can refer you to people. But those are very, very high interest rate. And because basically a private person, a private cohort of people that have money are letting you borrow the money for a short-term amount of time. So typically auction, people buy them in cash.
I think that now is the time to open things up for questions. So if anybody has any questions that they want to ask, you can put them in the chat or you can unmute yourself and just join the conversation. We're happy to answer anything that you might want to talk about. Any questions? I saw the foreclosure one too, but Lisa's already addressed that. So I'm scrolling down for other questions.
I do sort of want to point out, we talked a lot about condos and co-ops. There's definitely also options with single family and multifamily homes. You can do, I know Victoria did it for her home. You can do what's called a 203K loan, which is a gut rehab. And again, that's a little bit of a complicated process, but it's totally possible. So I think it's really just about having a conversation with me, a conversation with Victoria, and figuring out what you're looking for and what you want.
Yeah. I did so somebody's asking about what's the best to have for down payment. You can buy property rate as low as 3%, Lisa, with for single family.
3.5%. Yep.
3.5%. But I would say realistically, you really would like to have 10 to 20% down for condos and co-ops. Most co-ops mandate 20% down. So you don't want to be, but co-ops are also more affordable. So it's a real quandary to be in, is like, okay, well, I only have 10% down and I only can afford a co-op. You have to only look for co-ops that can accept 10% down. So if you have 20% down, you're in a really good position. And sometimes people put more than 20% down, and that can buy you better interest rates, leverage in the negotiating and offer stage. So if you have more than 20%, you really have a lot of leverage in the negotiating process.
And the down payment doesn't have to be, the money in your checking and savings account. It can come as from a gift, as long as it's from a family member. It can come from your retirement. It can come from mutual funds. So, there's multiple options for that down payment. Again, it's just a matter of your specific situation and what you have available.
Yeah, I don't think people realize they can borrow against their 401k. There's lots of options and resources you can tap into. So just because you don't have it in your savings account, my parents had to loan me some money. I wrote it down as a gift. It's because that was the way the financing told us to write it as a gift, but it was a loan in the long run that I did have to repay. And my parents actually had to co-sign my loan because I work for myself and I just wasn't going to be able to show on the books what that I could afford to buy it on my own. So I did a bunch of crazy things, like also sold my old engagement ring to come up with some down payment money. So, but honestly, it was the best decision. And I'm so glad Tina in my office was my real estate broker, because even as a real estate agent, you need representation. I needed to bounce ideas off somebody and somebody to help me, talk to my parents about like why this was a good idea. And now my mortgage is less than what I would be paying for rent on the house that I own in Red Hook, which I bought 11 years ago. And I would say that anybody that bought 10 years ago, that 10 to 12 year, right after the financial crash, saw their property values really double in that turnaround time. So were there other questions? That was the down payment one. Was there anything besides that? I'm just trying to scroll. So many screens. I think that's it on questions. Usually there's a lot of different questions. I want to thank everybody for coming, and there'll be tons of information and resources after this to share with you so that when you think of something, you can reach out to us. Anything else you want to add, Lisa, before we jump off?
No, not at all. Just, I'm here for any questions you have, as is Victoria and Rashidah. And, what I always tell people is, if you're going to buy now, awesome. If you want to have a conversation because you might buy in a year or two from now, that's totally okay too. And we can like talk to you about tips and how you can sort of get ready for this next phase of your life.
Yeah, strategy and planning. I worked with buyers for a really long time. It's not, you don't need to be prepared to buy tomorrow. You can your goal could be to buy in a year or two, and we can work with you to figure out how you get there. Okay, well, so I want to thank everybody for coming in their time and really appreciate it. And thank you so much, Lisa and Meredith, for running the chat. Everybody should have a great night and talk to you soon, hopefully.
Awesome. Bye.
Bye.